Hello my beautiful friends, my name is Alexandria and welcome to my channel. So today I'm going to be sitting down and talking about all the books that I read in the month of July. Better late than never. We're about halfway through the month of August, but I am here, I am queer, and I'm ready to talk about some books. So if you would like to hear about all the books that I've read last month, then just keep on watching. It was a pretty good reading month last month, but I was definitely feeling the waves of the reading slump happening throughout the month. Just kind of like burnout was kicking in, and that's kind of why I haven't been filming YouTube videos and posting as much as of recently. Which is interesting when you think about that, because it's like I've only not posted for like 2 weeks and it feels like it's been forever in YouTube land. But anyway, all this being said, I've definitely felt very slumpy and I have not read nearly as much as I have in the previous months, but I still read quite a bit of books. I read about 10 books altogether. I'm only going to talk about 9 of them because one of them I'm saving for a separate video, but I'm going to try to keep this as quick and concise as possible. We'll see how that goes, but let's go ahead and just get into it. The first book that I read last month, I finally got to, Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. Wow, this took me a minute. I don't know why. I think I just had really high expectations for it and I really didn't want to be disappointed by it. This is following our main character, whose name is Bree, and she unfortunately has just lost her mother in an accident. And basically she ends up at this college program, which is kind of like a pre-college program because she's 16, which I don't know about you, but me as a parent, I'm not sure how I would feel about letting my 16-year-old live on campus and be around other like adults essentially. So basically she ends up on this campus and a lot of shit starts going down pretty much right away. There's very magical things that are happening, and she finds out about this secret society that are supposed to be descendants of King Arthur and his knights. And so yeah, it's kind of about her journey of grieving, going through the grieving process when it comes to her mother, also realizing things about herself, dealing with racism. Oh man. Also, there's a love triangle that's happening. She starts to think that maybe her mother's death wasn't an accident and maybe it was actually murder. And so she's kind of going on this journey and figuring out what is going on in the world, which everything's very confusing and there's a lot that's happening throughout this book. I did listen to this on audiobook, and I definitely suggest that for anybody who likes audiobooks, and especially likes listening to fantasy books on audiobook, because the narrator was amazing. I don't even think I ended up writing this because I wasn't sure how I felt after I read it. I enjoyed it, but I felt like I wasn't as drawn in as I would have liked to have been with this story and as drawn in as I thought that I was going to be. So I felt like my expectations were a little bit too high, I think. I feel like it was a good setup for the rest of the series, so I am excited to read more. This one, there were just certain things that happened that I wasn't crazy about. Let's just talk about her best friend, because holy shit, she is not a best friend. I don't know what's wrong with her, but she's a mess. Also, another big issue that I had with it was that there is a love triangle that's happening, and it's not necessarily that I have a problem with the love triangle, even though I do feel like it's kind of something that's a little bit played out. Luckily, this love triangle is actually kind of a love triangle, but the main issue that I had with it was that both of the love interests are white. The whole cast is very white. And I had heard some other people who had read this book kind of talking about the same things, and I was like, maybe it wouldn't be that big of an issue. I just need to read it and see how I felt about it. And I definitely noticed it as well. It was very clear, very obvious, and it just kind of made me feel sad a little bit, because although I do love seeing Black main characters in these types of environments and fantasy environments, I also felt like she didn't have as much support as I would have liked for her to have, and maybe that'll happen in the later books. Maybe she'll like find an awesome Black friend group or something like that. But also I think I related to that as well because I did grow up in a very white saturated spaces. I definitely do recommend this. I definitely do suggest that everyone check this out, especially if you enjoy fantasy. I think this is a really important story. I'm excited to share this with other people. And yeah, I definitely think I would have enjoyed this a lot more growing up. All right, the next book that I want to talk about is People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. This was pretty much the most perfect summer read that I have read up until this point. I have not read the other book by this author, Beach Read, but I'm really wanting to read that because I thoroughly enjoyed this. I'm pretty sure I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. Basically, this is following two characters named Poppy and Alex. It's basically a friends to lovers situation. They go on vacations together. Basically, this is following them and their past vacations and also the current vacation that's happening and kind of them reconnecting and like what happened because they kind of had like a falling out. And I really just loved the characters. I loved the way that the story was told. I believed in them. I believed in Poppy and Alex. I just had a lot of fun reading this. The smut was great. There was a lot more depth in it than I thought that there was going to be. Because I was looking at this and I'm like, does this romance really need to be this thick? Like, is this really necessary? And it was. It definitely was. It was necessary and I purchased it. So if that says anything, because I don't purchase books very often unless I either think that I'm really going to enjoy it or I want to invest in the author. I definitely do not regret buying this because it was so good. Perfect summer read if you want to like have a summer romance that you read, but also like feel something, because I did cry reading this book. I did give this 5 out of 5 stars and it definitely does live up to the hype. All right, the next book that I read was something that I was really excited about. This was my second book by River Solomon, and this is called The Deep. This is a novella, and basically this is about the women who were slaves who were thrown over the ships coming over to this country, and their unborn children essentially turn into these mermaids. And it sounds very abstract. It sounds very kind of far-fetched and very strange, but I think that's really what drew me in. That's something that I really enjoy in books. I enjoy like kind of weird things that don't really make sense, but also like really do make sense at the same time somehow. I felt this very deeply, like ancestrally. And so I think that's why it was so hard hitting for me personally. And I listened to this on audiobook, which was one of the best decisions that I've probably ever made in my entire life. And it was narrated by one of the, I guess he's kind of like the collaborator, one of the collaborators for this book named David Diggs. He was so good. He was so wonderful. This book is actually inspired by a song from the group that he is in called Clipping. And of course the song is called The Deep, and it's honestly one of the most wonderful songs that I've ever heard in my life. It's so good. Highly suggest you listen to that if you are going to be reading this book, and even if you're not going to, I just want everybody to listen to it. It's kind of along the same lines of this book, feeling very abstract, kind of weird, kind of funky, kind of confuses you, doesn't make sense, but also it really does, and I feel like it goes really well with this book. Yeah, this is just such a beautiful book. I did end up purchasing it. As you can see, I love this cover. It's so beautiful. I think this is honestly one of my favorite book covers. I feel like this is a good start. If you're wanting to read books by River Solomon, I personally started out with Sorrowland, which I don't know if I would suggest for everyone because that is kind of, has a lot of like horror aspects, and yeah, I just feel like this is kind of a good like dipping your toes in. I normally don't really like novellas, but this was the most perfect novella that I've ever read. It just gave me so much depth and insight into the characters that I didn't get that feeling that I get from a lot of novellas, which is like, I'm not getting enough and I just want more. I just want a continuation of it. Even though I did definitely want more, I also felt like it was enough at the same time. And there are so many resources and I feel like so much information, and I'm sure there's like interviews and stuff that you can look at as well that I'm definitely going to look into. And I'm just excited to reread this and underline a bunch of things. I literally bought highlighters and this book so I could use them together. I might end up having to make a whole video when I'm rereading this book because it was honestly just so good, and I want everyone to read it because I think that it's such an important, hard-hitting, challenging, beautiful, wonderful, read, and River Solomon is such a gift to this planet. I had to take a little bit of a break, but I am back to go into the next book that I read in the month of July, and that is finally, I took the dust jacket off, but this is On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. As you can see, I did tab this book. This is the first book that I've ever tabbed, and what a perfect book to be my first book that I've annotated. This was everything that I thought it was going to be and even more. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I also was very triggered by it. I also found it to be one of the most challenging books that I've ever read. I did listen to this on audiobook while reading it at the same time. When I'm reading something that's really challenging and tougher for me to process, listening to it and reading it at the same time is just the easiest way for me to consume it. And it was absolutely wonderful. It was also narrated by the author, Ocean Vuong, which makes it even more perfect. This is following the main character, whose name is Little Dog, and he is basically writing a letter to his mother, who is a Vietnamese immigrant, and she can't read. This is written knowing that his mother is most likely never going to read this. I think this is semi-autobiographical, if I am remembering correctly. But you can very clearly tell that Ocean Vuong is a poet, because I had to like control myself from annotating or like adding a tab to every single part in this book, because there was so much beauty in it, and I'm definitely gonna have to go through and possibly reread it again when I feel like I'm mentally ready for it. The main character goes to a lot of really, really traumatic experiences, and it's not only their experience, it's also the experience of his mother and his grandmother as well. And it's told in a way that is super unique. It's told in a very like non-linear way. It's very much a stream of consciousness, and it's so intriguing and refreshing and really, really challenging. You definitely need to be in the right headspace before you get into this, and I knew that going into it. I had actually previously started this like a year ago. I had started like the first chapter or like the first section, and I had to stop because I just wasn't mentally at the place where I was ready to read it. And honestly, I wasn't really mentally at the place where I could read it, but I really just wanted to finally get it done, and I'm really proud of myself for getting to it. This also makes me want to read more poetry and possibly like dive into poetry by Ocean Vuong. I feel like that would be this is like the perfect opportunity to be able to do that. This felt like poetry, honestly. It really did. It was wonderful. I did end up giving this 4 out of 5 stars instead of a full 5 stars. I think just like emotionally and the way that the story hit for me, it wasn't a full 5 stars for me personally. I think maybe if I reread it and I'm at a little bit of a different place, I feel like it may be a 5-star read for me. So moving on to the books that I don't physically have, the next book that I read was The Push, and it was sold as kind of like a psychological thriller following this mother who has a daughter, and she feels like there's something just terribly wrong with her child. And I listened to this on audiobook, which I feel like was, again, another perfect way to read this book. I really like listening to thrillers on audiobook. I feel like they hit a little bit more deeply for me. I don't want to say that this is a super well written thriller, because one, I don't read a lot of thrillers, and so I'm not going to be the best judge of whether a thriller is really good or not. But for me, I didn't really find it to be a thriller. I think there were thrilling aspects that kind of like kept you on your toes, but the whole idea of like this fear of what her daughter was going to turn out to be, and basically if she was going to turn out to be the way that she thought she was, I felt like a lot of it was just other people gaslighting this mother and also her gaslighting herself. Because she does end up having another child after her daughter, and the relationship is wonderful. It's very different from the one with her daughter, and the contrast is just even higher once that second child is born, and just like a lot of shit goes down. There's also we're also following her mother and her mother's mother as well, which is a really interesting way to go about this story, because I wasn't really expecting that, but it was really interesting to be able to see how those experiences and that trauma that they all experienced kind of was passed down through motherhood. I felt like it hit really hard for me personally because I am a mother, and there is so much about parenthood that I feel like a lot of people aren't aware of, not even touching the subjects of like postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety, but postpartum psychosis, shit like that. Like, we don't even talk about those things. I feel like a lot of us, like in mainstream worlds, it's tough for us to even talk about postpartum depression, let alone postpartum anxiety, let alone postpartum psychosis and other things that can happen in the postpartum period. The fact that she kind of became an unreliable narrator because of the fact that people didn't believe her, and so she didn't believe herself. And I think that was a scary concept in and of itself, because like, it's so easy for things like that to happen, especially if you're not fully aware and you don't have the languaging to describe exactly what's happening. It can happen so easily. Like, gaslighting happens. I feel like that's where it felt very like insidious and thrilling. I think I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. So the next book that I read was Watch Over Me, and this is a YA novel, I believe, and this is following our main character who has aged out of the foster care system, and she ends up getting this gig working at this kind of farm where there's a bunch of foster kids living with this family, and they go there to kind of have a new life. And it kind of feels like summer camp and like cottagecore and also like big family vibes, and oh my god, it just makes me so that part of the story just brought me so much joy. But she gets to this place and very quickly realizes that there's some other things going on in this place that she was not aware of. Basically, everybody has a ghost. It kind of has to do with the things that they need to process and heal from. And that's pretty much all that I can say about it without giving spoilers. I did really enjoy this. I gave this 3.75 stars. It wasn't my favorite in the world just because I did find it super predictable. I wanted a little bit more. I understood what the author was trying to get across, and I understood what like the setup was, and I understood why the author may not have wanted to make it as clear cut and like in your face, and I think that was very smart. The subject matter, I just wanted a little bit more for me personally, but I do understand why a lot of people find a lot of value in this story, because it's not like super in your face, trauma, triggering, traumatic. A lot of things are just kind of like alluded to. I also felt like I wasn't able to connect with the main character as much, just because I didn't feel like I knew that much about them, or as much as I would have liked to know. I did enjoy that book. It wasn't my favorite in the world, but I'm glad that I read it. Right, the next book that I read was Naamah by Sarah Blake, and this was one that I was super excited about reading. This is essentially a biblical retelling of Noah's Ark from the perspective of Noah's wife, and it is sapphic. There's some magical realism going on, and wow, let me just say that this book was all of the things that I could have ever wanted and more. If you had told me that this existed, I wouldn't have believed you. Like, when I heard about it, I was like, holy shit, what? Why has no one else done this? Why is this not a thing? Like, why is this not a genre? Is this a genre? Is this like a subgenre? Because I want more. The atmosphere in this book was just next level, if you get that reference. It had so many things that I was not expecting. I really went into it just knowing that it was going to be a biblical retelling. I knew that it was sapphic. I knew that it was probably going to be fucking weird, and it was. And it was beautiful, and it was so much more than I ever could have asked for. When we talk about the story of Noah's Ark, when we talk about a lot of Bible stories, we don't think about these things. Like, what are the animals doing? Like, how do they control, like, them mating and, like, the babies that are born and, like, the mental aspect of being on a fucking arc for you don't even know how long. Honestly, one of my favorite books that I've read this year. 5 out of 5 stars. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I just want to be able to give this book to everyone, honestly. The next book was actually super random. I had this on my TBR for a while, and I just wanted an audiobook to listen to, and so I was like, let's just try it out. Why not? It was a pretty short audiobook as well, and it is called The Rest of Us Just Live Here. It's a really interesting storyline because when we hear about kind of main characters and stories, we hear about, like, what am I thinking of? Like Red Rising or Ready Player One, where you hear about the hero and like the hero's journey is what's happening. This is a little bit different because it's about the people in the background who are kind of just living their lives, doing their thing, and kind of seeing these heroes from afar on their adventures and just being like, wow, okay, I don't want any part of that. And it was told in such a way that I just was not expecting. And I was so pleasantly surprised. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars, and I definitely need to read more by this author. I honestly wish this was a series because it was so good. And there was so much of a discussion about mental health. I really enjoy unique looks into subjects that we have seen a lot before, you know? I did read the second book, the last book in the duology. The first one is Darius the Great is Not Okay, and this one was Darius the Great Deserves Better. And it was so good. I love Darius. If you didn't hear me talking about my love for Darius the Great is Not Okay in, I think, my previous wrap-up video, I think I read that in July. I love Darius. I feel very connected to Darius in a lot of ways. One thing that is very, very refreshing that I noticed and like made note of in my head while I was reading this book was the fact that a lot of times he was like, okay, I'm feeling this feeling or I'm thinking this thought. I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know what to do about this. Someone is showing up in this way and I don't know why. I don't know what to do about this. Like, just continuously being super honest and super straightforward with the fact that, like, he just didn't know what the fuck was going on a lot of the time with himself, with the people around him, and it's just super refreshing. One thing that I didn't like about this was that there was a time jump at the beginning, whereas I would have liked to see like what happened to get to that point. Because in the last book, he kind of left off getting into a better place with his relationship with his father, and when we go into the next book, we kind of see the aftermath of that, but there was a lot of like backtracking and explaining exactly what happened. And for me personally, I just want to see it all happening, you know? Like, I don't want to know that it's happened behind the scenes. I just want more of Darius. But I really enjoyed it. Another big plot point in this was that he was kind of dealing with, you know, friendships, and also he has a boyfriend, also dealing with like mental health challenges. And I love the just like raw way that this author approaches mental health. The fact that Darius and his father also deals with depression. I thought that it, again, was another story that it just feels so real. Like, Darius feels like such a real kid. I wish this series was going to be longer, but I'm pretty sure it's just going to be a duology. But I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was wonderful. But yes, I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're staying safe. I miss you all. I am excited to get back into making videos again. Let me know down below any books that you were excited to read last month, or what you're reading currently, or just let me know how you're doing. So I will see y'all in my next video. I love you.